Welcome to Star Wars Action News, helping Star Wars collectors collect better.
Hello, Star Wars Action News listeners. This is Nathan P. Butler with your Star Wars Continuity Report, covering all things Dark Horse, Bantam, LucasArts, and more in the world of the official Star Wars saga. The continuity that began with Heir to the Empire is nearing its half-decade mark as we round out 1995. But for some, the jury is still out on whether this new saga can hold a candle to the great Marvel Comics Star Wars continuity that was dashed aside to make way for this new universe. If it makes you feel any better, just think of the Marvel stuff as legends. Fun but fanciful stories that are important in the old days of Star Wars, just not real anymore, now that we have this officially sanctioned Lucasfilm continuation of the saga. In comic form, the Star Wars official continuity kicked off 4 years ago with the first issue of Tom Veitch's Dark Empire, which sent Luke briefly to the dark side, saw Mon Calamari ravaged by the World Devastators, and brought back Emperor Palpatine as a clone, the Emperor Reborn. It was controversial on all three notes, and set a darker tone 6 years after Return of the Jedi than was set in the Thrawn trilogy of a year earlier, or the Jedi Academy trilogy published last year that was set the very next year after Dark Empire. It was a significant 6-issue miniseries, and it stood well on its own, which gave fans plenty of reason to be frustrated with Dark Horse when they did not leave well enough alone and brought us the weaker Dark Empire 2, released between last December and this May, followed by the Millennium Falcon-sized space slug turd that is Empire's End, which just concluded its mercifully brief 2-issue run. With what is already being thought of as the Dark Empire cycle concluded though, we have a chance to take stock here of just what impact this comic trilogy, and particularly Empire's End, has had on the official continuity that we've seen grow consistently since 1991. The first Dark Empire series took fans to a dark place, no pun intended. Coruscant began in the wake of an Imperial invasion. Luke learned that Palpatine had survived being hurled down the shaft on the Death Star 2 to live in a clone body that he then replaced with a new, younger one. Luke, like Ulic Qel-Droma in Dark Empire's interesting text entries that were later dramatized in Tales of the Jedi, would try to battle the dark side from within and fall himself before Leia could help draw him back to the light. It was heavy stuff, and one has to wonder how Luke's brush with darkness will affect him in the future. Barring some references to the matter in the Jedi Academy trilogy, it seems that Bantam is reluctant to deal with the issue to any large degree, focusing much more lately on Luke's love life and his desire to get it on with Callista, a girl he met as a ghost and who now inhabits the body of a woman who was once Luke's own student. No one ever said Star Wars relationships weren't dysfunctional as hell. As Dark Empire ended though, it seemed that the Emperor was truly dead. Again. Sure, it was a little redundant, but the potential for where this takes Luke now cannot be overstated, assuming any writers are brave enough to tackle the issue. And if nothing else, many fans now have Luke bowing to the Emperor, proclaiming, "Yes, my father's destiny is my own," etched into their memory of great Star Wars moments alongside their favorite film scenes. When we left Leia in Dark Empire, she was pregnant with a child that we already knew, thanks to the haphazard jumping about the timeline that's already a staple of Star Wars publishing, would be Anakin Solo, whom we met as a baby in Jedi Surge. It seemed, though, that much like this year's Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, the goal in some Star Wars circles now is to take minute elements of the saga and turn them into their own stories. Whereas that anthology did so with the denizens of the Cantina scene from A New Hope, Dark Horse appears to have decided that we needed to actually see the birth of Anakin Solo, as we saw the births of Jason and Jaina 2 years ago in The Last Command. So Dark Empire was bloated into 2 more unnecessary, less interesting miniseries that seemed designed to push, pun intended, Anakin Solo onto the stage through Palpatine's obsession with obtaining the child as a new host for his consciousness. All of a sudden, the Emperor Reborn was an even bigger schemer, initiating Operation Shadowhand, which brought us mostly useless and soon-forgotten Dark Jedi antagonists like Executor Cedrus. He now focused on Leia's unborn child with a single-minded evil, to the point of needing a mustache to twirl as he schemes. Dark Empire 2 drew to a close without a satisfying face-to-face defeat of Palpatine, our heroes often feeling like side players to newcomers like Cam Solusar, who surely can't be fated to remain a central character for that long after this heavy-handed insertion here, and Leia finally giving birth to her third child with Han. A child for whom she apparently never discussed a name with Han, unless we're to believe that she simply changed her mind and named him Anakin after already agreeing to the name with which Han greets his newest son, Han Solo Jr. Wow. Hopefully if Lando ever has a child, he won't take his old friend's lead and try to name his own son Lando Jr. Yeah, right, as if Lando will ever settle down with one woman long enough to get married and have a child of his own. With a brief vision of the Solo children as future Jedi Knights, Dark Empire 2 left us nodding about events we already knew would occur, thanks to things like young Jedi Knights, and knowing the Emperor Reborn must be defeated again at some point, since he's not around in the novels set later in the saga. With stories jumping all around the timeline, though, we started to realize that it's not about what fate awaits our heroes, but how they get there that's the most interesting. Enter Empire's End, Dark Horse's attempt to give us a satisfactory conclusion to the Dark Empire era that was, frankly, concluded rather well already with Dark Empire number 6 3 years ago. Could they pull it off? And what ramifications would emerge for the galaxy far, far away? There's a lot to be said of Empire's End, most of it negative. Ignoring the story for a moment, I have to ask, who thought it was a good idea to change up the art style for this miniseries? Cam Kennedy's stylized artwork served Dark Empire and Dark Empire 2 well, though he certainly had his detractors. Most notably, he was criticized for his overuse of blues, greens, reds, and letting colors wash over the artwork as his art often does. For Empire's End, though, it's as if Dark Horse decided to double down. You didn't like the color scheme? Let's see how you like that same color scheme applied to art that looks like someone ate Cam Kennedy's artwork and vomited it back up with some undigested mashed potatoes. I can imagine the Empire's End artist lounging in a chair next to his henchman, like Jack Nicholson's Joker, grumbling about those criticizing Kennedy's artwork. Stylized artist, terrorizes readers. Wait till they get a load of me. The artwork takes all the punch out of what was supposed to be the final act in what began as a particularly dark Star Wars tale. Instead, it looks like we're watching Archie and Jughead battle the Empire. Art aside, though, it's the story that matters most in terms of where the saga can build from here. The notion that Palpatine's clones are deteriorating and leaving him quite mad plays well on the idea of the mad clone Joruus C'baoth, or Joruus C'baoth, in the Thrawn trilogy. While one would hate to see cloning become so commonplace in the saga as to make death somewhat meaningless, one has to wonder what this might entail if we were to ever see stories of the Clone Wars, in which it's assumed that the Jedi battled mad clones and perhaps even Mandalorian super commandos, if Marvel's take on the era is to be believed. Alas, we may never know, as Lucas has deemed the Clone Wars off limits for current Star Wars writers. Still, the implications are fascinating. Perhaps cloning in Star Wars is a gateway to madness no matter who is cloned, suggesting a sort of punishment from the Force for trying to create life. On the whole, the story acts as a sort of clearing of the board for the next game, which is Kevin J. Anderson's already released Jedi Academy trilogy. Most of the new heroic characters from the cycle, Imperatrios Brand, Jim and Rey Visana, have been killed off in battling minions of the dark side. Palpatine is dead, again supposedly for good this time, and the Empire's newest super weapons of the week, the Galaxy Gun and, to a lesser extent, yet another Eclipse II Star Destroyer, have managed to not only destroy each other, but to destroy Biss, the setting for much of the story. All these things add up to a rather pat, quick 2-issue ending that feels less like its own episode in a Dark Empire trilogy, and more like an extended epilogue or the last episodes of a TV show that learned late in its season that it was being cancelled. On the other hand, the story does pose other interesting questions. Will Anakin Solo suffer any ill effects from the machinations of Palpatine and his brushes with the dark side while in the womb and later as a baby? Will Leia start to truly train as a Jedi? It doesn't seem that way from the beginning of the Corellian trilogy that we've already seen, but maybe, just maybe, there's something we're missing. Is Palpatine right from Empire's End when he says, "Skywalker blood runs dark with the Force"? I mean, surely they don't intend to turn one or more of the Solo children to the dark side, or even into a Sith Lord, but that would seem to lean towards some of Mark Hamill's comments on a possible sequel trilogy back in the 80s. The story does leave Cam Solusar alive, which will allow other writers to use him in the future, though he isn't exactly the most compelling character to draw from. We also now have seen a modern-era version of Tales of the Jedi locations like Ossus and Onderon. so one can only hope that as Star Wars grows into different eras and generations, that we might see more of this sort of cross-era use of locations and concepts to make the saga feel less like just the life and times of the Skywalkers and Solos, and more like a true sprawling history that has only yet been hinted at in Tales of the Jedi and veiled references in other sources. Dark Horse has both wowed us and left us shaking our heads over these 5 years of their tenure with Star Wars. We now have great stories like Tales of the Jedi, bringing us the kind of Jedi drama and falls from grace that we can only hope we'll see if Lucas ever gets around to making the prequel films he discussed back in the 80s. We have the interesting yet old news, Classic Star Wars and Classic Star Wars The Early Adventures, bringing us edited reprints of the LA Times newspaper strips. And we've had the childish ridiculousness of the new Jabba the Hutt one-shots and Dark Horse's take on droids. Granted, their take on droids is still leaps and bounds better than Marvel's Star Comics series that ended 8 years ago, but that isn't saying much, kinda like being valedictorian of summer school. With Empire's End, we see one of the best, darkest concepts Dark Horse has brought to the saga, watered down until it becomes redundant, ugly, and better left unread. One has to wonder, with such varying quality among its titles, if Dark Horse can ever hope to keep the Star Wars license for as long as Marvel did.
Thanks for watching this video. You can see full episodes of Star Wars Action News with more collecting news and reviews at swactionnews.com. We also have thousands of toy and collectible photos in our photo gallery. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. May the pegs be stocked and the Force be with you.